Welcome to the Special Siblings Podcast, the only show focused exclusively on supporting siblings of kids with disabilities. Join us as we invite psychologists, researchers, parents, and siblings of all ages to weigh in on the issues facing this too often overlooked population. I'm your host, Jessica Leving, author of the children's book Special Siblings, and more importantly, a sibling myself to a brother with autism. Thanks for tuning in, and I'm looking forward to learning with you. Hi, and welcome back to the show. We're here with the Special Siblings Podcast, and today I am so excited and honored to have a wonderful guest with us. He has been called the grandfather of the sibling movement. So I want to give Don Meyer a chance to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your work with siblings.
Hi, Jessica. My name's Don Meyer. For 28 years, I was the director of the Sibling Support Project, the country's first national organization dedicated to the lifelong concerns of brothers and sisters of people with special health, developmental, and mental health needs. And over the years, we've had many sibling initiatives, but we're probably best known for these things that are called Sibshops, which are peer support and education programs for school-age brothers and sisters.
So it seems like, from what I can see, there really wasn't anything for Sibs before you started this work. Is that true?
Well, yes and no. There wasn't much. Sibshops actually predate the Sibling Support Project. I started them in 1982. It was an outgrowth of work I initially did with fathers of kids with disabilities at the University of Washington. And we quickly saw, when we created this fathers program, that there are other traditionally underserved family members of children who have disabilities, namely fathers, obviously, but siblings and grandparents. And so we created this program called CFAM, S-E-F-A-M, supporting extended family members. And we tried to do something for these traditionally underserved family members. And with regards to Sibshops, I took a look at what people had done for young brothers and sisters. And I certainly didn't invent the notion of bringing young brothers and sisters together, but there wasn't much. And the little I was able to read about in the clinical literature seemed to describe a situation where kids were sitting around in folding chairs with a therapist talking about how screwed up their life was because they had a brother or sister with Down syndrome. And that did not talk to the 11-year-old in me. It's not something I would have wanted to give up a Saturday afternoon to do, nor did it jive with the families that I knew. So I wanted to have something for young brothers and sisters that was very celebratory, that was fun and was intrinsically rewarding for them to come to, but also gave them a chance to talk about the good parts and maybe not so good parts of having a sib with someone else who gets it, someone else who's walking down a similar path, and also give them a chance to learn something about the services their brothers and sisters might be getting. So that's what Sibshops are about. They're peer support and education programs for school-age brothers and sisters. They mix discussion activities and informational activities with lots and lots of pedal to the metal recreational activities. They're a guaranteed good time. And I think my initial instincts were right. There are now 500 Sibshops worldwide. They are in every state. They are in Iceland, they're in Argentina, they're in Japan, they're in Ireland, they're in Malta, New York, where they're done for ultra-Orthodox families, and they're done bilingually in Los Angeles. And the reason I think that they do as well as they do with such diverse locations and such diverse populations is that they bring kids together in those two universal languages. One is shared experiences, to be sure, and the other is play. We are unapologetically playful in Sibshops. And I tell people who want to become Sibshops facilitators that if you're not having fun, you're not doing it right.
And so the facilitators are not staff of the Sibling Support Project. It's outsourced or kind of handed over. How does that work?
Yeah, well, people who want to become Sibshop facilitators for their local organization need to sign off on the Sibshop standards of practice, which is something you can find on the Sibling Support Project website. And the standards are just to assure that everybody's singing off the same page, and then when families are sending their kids to something that calls itself a Sibshop, they're sending them to something that reflects the goals and values of the Sibshop model.
So I'm curious how you developed the model. Like, did you have to look like at research, or do you have psychology training? Like, what is the model based on? How did that evolve?
Well, the model, quite honestly, I just sort of made it up as I went along. And my background is in education. I went to the University of Washington to get a master's in early childhood special education. And I've worked with kids for many, many years. And I have a sense as to what floats and what doesn't.
Uh-huh.
And again, my instincts, I think, ultimately proved somewhat right. And it's just, again, we very much take a wellness aspect. You know, we say that Sibshops, while they may be quote unquote therapeutic for kids to come to, they're not what most people would consider therapy, group or otherwise. And so,
Mhm.
again, we take a wellness approach.
And are there any like statistics on, like, have you guys done any evaluation to see, like, be able to test like if it's effective, if it, like, in terms of any kind of specific thing that it like reduces rates of anxiety, or not so much because it's not a therapeutic program?
Some colleagues at the University of Washington surveyed people who participated in Sibshops when they were kids, and we wanted to see whether there's any lasting impact.
Mm-hmm.
And amongst the things they found is that over 90% of the respondents said that Sibshops had a positive effect on the feelings that they had for their brothers and sisters who have disabilities.
Mm-hmm.
Sibshops taught coping strategies to over 2/3 of the respondents. You gotta like that.
Yeah.
3/4 reported that Sibshops affected their adult lives, and I really like that, and I'll get back to that. And then 94% said that they would recommend Sibshops to other. But the one that said 3/4 reported that Sibshops affected their adult lives, we really like that because we've long held the belief that supporting a family member benefits everybody,
Mm-hmm.
not only the typically developing Sib, but if we attend to Sibs when they're young, validate their feelings, provide them with needed information, we increase the chances that they will elect to remain lovingly involved with their brothers and sisters when their parents are no longer around. I think
Mm-hmm.
anybody that works with adults with disabilities probably knows some adults with disabilities that don't have an especially good relationship with their brothers and sisters.
Yeah.
And you can't help but think that if those Sibs maybe had been attended to a little bit more when they were younger, things might be a little bit different. They might have a different relationship with their brothers and sisters. So there seems to be a lasting impact that benefits everybody. And you could easily make the argument that the greatest beneficiary of Sibshops is not the typically developing Sibs, it's the brother or sister who has the disability.
Yeah, because in the long run, it's making that a relationship that they want to stay part of
Well,
and feel more
yeah,
prepared to.
because
Mhm.
brothers and sisters will have the longest lasting relationship with the family member who has a disability. They will certainly be in the lives of that person longer than any service provider will, but they'll probably be in the lives of that person longer than even the parents will.
Yeah.
This is a relationship easily in excess of 65, 70, 75 years. That's a long time.
Yeah.
And siblings, experiences parallel parents' experience. They're going to have many, if not most, of the same issues that parents will, as well as some of that are uniquely there. They probably log on more hours and more minutes than with their siblings than anybody, including parents, over the long haul. And so, from my point of view, people ought to be thinking about Sibs at every turn. Yet I
Mm-hmm.
find myself frequently in this ridiculous position of having to remind my friends, my colleagues, people ought to know better that people who worship at the altar of family-centered care and family-centered services, I'm having to remind them that brothers and sisters are a part of the family.
Yeah.
Sibs are not in most people's functional definition of family.
Or caregivers. Yeah. And a lot of times it is the sib who's going to be the caregiver, and they're not included necessarily in that kind of, in those
Yep.
policies.
Yep. There are literally, Jessica, there are literally millions of Sibs in the United States alone. Where do I get that number? Well, if you accept the notion that there are millions of people with developmental disabilities in the United States, well, most of them have at least one brother or sister.
Yeah.
So there are millions of Sibs, and many of them are not accessing the resources. So I was, for many, many years, I was running a one guy national project dedicated to lifelong concerns of these million brothers and sisters. Not that I wanted to be a one guy, but there's very little funding to support sibling initiatives. Our project, the Sibling Support Project, has had adult sibling initiatives for many years. SibNet, our online group for adult Sibs, has been around for over 20 years. It's almost as old as the internet. It started off as a listserv and then migrated to being a Yahoo group. But for the past 10 years or so, it's a closed Facebook group for adult Sibs. And we currently have pushing 5,000 members from all over the English-speaking world.
And I'm in that group. It's amazing. I definitely will post the link to that. I think I've mentioned it in other episodes too. I'll definitely link there, because any adult sibling that I meet, I tell them to join immediately. It's such a great network.
Yeah. And for any of your listeners, please know that are not Sibs, please know that this is just for adult Sibs, not for parents and service providers who might be interested. The people in the group really appreciate having a place where they can go and be candid about some of the ambivalent feelings that they have about being the sibling of a person with a disability. They want it to be, just for them, and that's understandably so. So we have SibNet. It's been around for a long, long time. We also have Sib20, and that's for 20-something Sibs, let's say 18 to early 30s. And that has about 500 members. We have Sib-Teen for obviously teen Sibs. And that I co-moderate with Kate Strom, who's the director of Siblings Australia. And then we have another one for people who are running Sibshops. So yeah, keeps us busy.
Yeah, so there's a lot out there, which is the really exciting thing. And I don't think enough people know. I mean, obviously thousands of people that are in these groups do know, but really, really excited for more people to hopefully learn about and access these resources. Because I know for myself, being part of the SibNet Facebook group has been so supportive, and I don't necessarily post that often, but just seeing there are so many people who post that I see myself in many of their situations, and then seeing the outpouring of supportive comments that they get from other people saying, yep, I went through this too.
People are wonderfully supportive. I mean, people celebrate things, share jokes that only another Sib would get, or insights or experiences. And, quite honestly, sometimes people vent. These are people who might vent and then go and do some major Herculean effort to support their brothers and sisters, but sometimes need to blow off a little steam in a non-judgmental forum, and that's what we try to provide on SibNet.
Yeah, and I think that really brings it back too. Like, that feels to me like a lot of what I imagine happens at Sibshops as well for the younger kids, is to provide that same peer group where it's safe to express whatever's on your mind, whether that's positive or not so positive, in a group of people that get it.
Yeah, and none of these things are pity parties. They really aren't. However, I mean, let's face it, the sibling experience, let's forget disabilities for the moment. The sibling experience is sort of the working definition of ambivalence. Most Sibs are hugging and slugging, and often in the same 15-minute period. And when you add the dynamic of a disability to the sibling relationship, it's like you've sprinkled monosodium glutamate on the relationship. The highs are higher and the lows are lower. And, you can't pretend it, the popular media would have you think that, having a brother or sister with a disability is the most ennobling thing that a person could have. And while there's certainly ennobling aspects to it, there's some parts that not a whole lot of fun.
Yes.
And so, we try to acknowledge the whole continuum of the sibling experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, like, for me, that was a big part of why I wanted to write my children's book, because I wanted to have a book that said, that was able to sort of validate those feelings of, like, you know what, we're siblings, just like any other set of siblings. Sometimes we fight, sometimes he gets on my nerves, and sometimes it's really fun. And it
Yeah.
doesn't have to be that it's this perfect, happy, sunshine, rainbows. I've learned so much, like there may be some of that, but that's not the full experience.
Yeah.
And so that actually segues a little. I know you have written pretty much like every other book out there, like every other good book that acknowledges that full spectrum of feelings, seems to be by you. So I know.
Thank you.
I'm curious if you could summarize, and I know obviously it's challenging, but maybe if you could give like a taste or a sneak peek to somebody who hasn't read any of the literature that's out there, hasn't been to a Sib shop, what would be like your top tip for a parent that's listening that has a young child who has a sibling with a disability? And then I'm also curious, maybe if you can share a little about how the landscape has changed since you started your work, and where you think we still need the most changes and advocacy. And
Yeah. There are a number of things I think both parents and service providers can do for Sibs, especially young Sibs. First, I think they need to provide them with age-appropriate information from a variety of sources. Let's think about for just a second, where do parents get information about their child's disability and its treatment? Well, they get it from other parents, they get it from service providers, they get it from the internet, they get it from books that are written on the topic. Where do Sibs get information? Well, if they're lucky, they get it from their parents. And parents certainly need to be proactive in providing them with information, but service providers need to make themselves every bit available as they would make themselves available to the parents of that child with special needs. If we're really interested in providing family-centered services rather than parent-centered services. So, if you want to, use the F word, the family word, we need to be remembering that family member who's going to have the longest lasting relationship. So we need to make ourselves available to young Sibs. And I also challenge organizations, parents whose child has a specific diagnosis, to look at organizations that they may belong to, and look at their website, and to look at that website to see what, if anything, they have prepared for young readers on that disability. And if they don't have anything for young readers on that website, they need to ask that organization, why the hell not? There's a lot of people who could benefit from a kid-friendly description of whatever that disability is. So first of all, they need information, and parents need to be proactive about it. And a birds and the bees kind of conversation is not a great way to go. A much better way is to kind of keep the topic of the disability an open topic, and know that that's something that they can, discuss with their kids. Second, I think brothers and sisters need opportunities to meet other brothers and sisters. On SibNet, we often have members who are well into their 40s who are only now connecting with other Sibs. That's a long time to wait for validation.
Yeah.
We would never, ever, ever make parents of kids with disabilities wait 40 years to meet their peers. But somehow that's okay with Sibs. If any of us were to bump into a parent of a newly diagnosed kid, what's one of the first things we'd want to do? We'd want to introduce them to other parents. It makes total sense. But brothers and sisters don't often get that same consideration. And I'm certainly a proponent of Sibshops, but that's not the only way. Parents can get to know other families, and they can hang out, have a picnic with other families where their Sibs meet another family's Sibs. Other kids can meet them online. They can meet them in pages of books, such as our book, Views from Our Shoes, the Sibling Slam book, or your book. It's just so that they know that there are other kids that are walking down a similar path. I also encourage parents to have the best possible communication they can have with their typically developing kids. That's important in every family, right? But when you have a child with a disability, I think is mission critical. And an evening course in active listening would sure be a time well spent, but probably a much more makeable shot would be to pick up the book, How to Talk So Kids Will Listen and Listen So Kids Will Talk by Adele Faber. It's a great crash course in active listening. It has nothing to do with disabilities, but it's good stuff. I encourage parents to carve time out of their crazy busy schedule to spend one-on-one with their typically developing kids. Does this mean a trip to Disney World with that kid? I suppose, if you could pull it off. But more likely it's going to be a trip to McDonald's or a walk around the lake to let the kid know that by deeds and by words that they have your undivided attention and during that time. And I know that's easy for me and not so easy for people to pull off, but I have had parents, moms, independent of one another, share with me their secret strategy. These moms said, you know what I do? About every other month, I yank my daughter out of school. We play hooky. We'll go shopping. We'll get our nails done. We'll go out to lunch. We'll take a hike in the country. We'll do lots of things, but whatever we do, we talk and we talk and we talk and we talk. And whatever schooling she may have missed that day is more than compensated by the relationship maintenance we've had during that time. I also think parents as well as service providers need to learn more about life as a SIB. There's a lot of good learning needing to be done. There's some really good books out there on the sibling issues. Riding the Bus with My Sister by Rachel Simon, The Ride Together by Judy Karasik, Kate Strom's being the other one. The first few chapters of the Sibshop curriculum. There's some papers that I think would be very helpful. Our website has two in particular that I think, well, actually three. One is called What Siblings Would Like Parents and Service Providers to Know. It's like 20 tips for parents and service providers. Another one is called How to Let Young Siblings Know That You Care. And this was a collection of thoughts that adult Sibs said that that when they were kids, this is what people had done that made them feel seen. Sibs often feel invisible, right? Mm-hmm. And sometimes these are big ideas and sometimes they're really small ideas. For instance, there's one woman who said, I remember 50 years ago when I was, in kindergarten and I went with my brother, to his therapy appointment. There was a nun who gave me a cookie and looked me in the eye and said, ask me how I was doing. She remembered that 50 years later. Mm-hmm. So, and there's a third paper on our website called Sibs in School. And that's what school personnel can do to recognize and acknowledge and support the young Sibs that are clearly in their schools. Any school in the United States has Sibs, right? And, we need to acknowledge that they're there. And there's some handy tips with all of them. Sibling panels can be a great way to learn about life as a Sib if somebody has an opportunity to do one.
Yeah, I definitely think the school and service provider piece is huge too, because I see posts sometimes. There was a great article that we shared on the Special Siblings Facebook group a while back too about siblings who are struggling in school because it's hard to turn in an assignment, or like there isn't teacher recognition of, well, I was gonna write this paper last night, but then my sibling had a seizure or, had to be rushed to the hospital. Or I had to help my mom with, a meltdown where my sibling was throwing things in the house and needed an extra pair of hands. And just that awareness. And also the other piece for everybody that I've been sort of struggling with is whether or not, or how often to ask, like to, pull the sibling away and say, like, how are you feeling? Are you doing okay? And how much to probe to make room for those feelings, because I've definitely noticed that, like, a lot of the people that I've talked to, people that I've met, and like, I remember for myself to some extent growing up and I don't think I was consciously aware of being able to say I feel stressed or I'm jealous or
Sure.
I'm angry. It wasn't
Yeah.
until much later, like in therapy, figuring that out.
Right.
Um,
Right.
and a lot of moms have said to me, "Oh, like I think what you're doing is so great, but my kids are fine. My sibling, my neurotypical sibling helps their brother with a disability all the time, and she's very cheerful about it. She loves him very much. She's a mini mom,
Yeah.
and it's like that's wonderful. That's really
Yeah. It's
great.
great.
And there might be other feelings in there too."
Yeah, there is. Well, I mean, that is one, that is one of the concerns that you hear about Sibs is sort of this pressure to achieve, to be the good kid, the one
Hmm.
who's not going to bring home any bad news because they feel it's their job to balance the scale and to make everything okay. And they again, they don't want to bring any problems home. Two other little tips for parents that I always suggest. One is to I encourage parents to reassure their typically developing kids by making plans for their child's future. And as the children grow up, share those plans with the typically developing kids because kids at a very early age often think that, they will be living in the same house with their brother or sister with a disability, and they will not have the opportunities that other sibs will have because they will need to care for their sib with a disability. And I think parents would be surprised at what an early age parents, young sibs are thinking about the days to come.
Yeah.
So if parents are busy making plans, so if the daughter says, Mommy, when Mike grows up, I want Mike to come live with me. Mommy could say, well, honey, if that's what you want to do, and if that's what Mike wants to do when you grow up, that's great. But if that's something you decide you don't want to do, that's okay too, because Daddy and I are busy making plans. And they
Hmm.
need to know that there's a way, young sibs need to know that there's a way to remain lovingly involved with the lives of their sibs in the days to come. And it doesn't all necessarily mean that they need to live under the same roof.
Yeah. Yeah. And that goes back, I think, to what you said early on about if we can do that, if we can have that reassurance of kids and do the work and start laying the groundwork when they're young so that they aren't 40 years old and suddenly feeling all this pressure. Like it's better for the person with the disability too, because
Yeah.
the sib is going to feel prepared to
Right.
take that on and
Right.
be able to be lovingly involved instead of be panicked, overwhelmed, frustrated,
Yeah.
stressed involved.
Yeah. Yeah. And then the last recommendation I make is, I think it's important for parents to remember that the single strongest factor affecting a sibling's interpretation of their brother or sister's disability will be, guess what, the parent's interpretation of the
Hmm.
disability. So the parents perceive it as a life-searing tragedy from which there's no escape. Well, they shouldn't be surprised if their kids perceive it that way. But if they perceive it as being a series of challenges that they have little choice but to meet with as much grace and humor as they can possibly muster, they have every reason to believe that at the end of the day, the typically developing kids will perceive it that way as well.
Yeah. Yeah, that is a really important one. There's a lot of modeling that you can do to really translate, what your experience is. And I think that relates to the feelings and dealing with validating feelings, like, being able to say, yeah, this situation is hard for me too. And that doesn't mean that I go in my room and close the door and cry about it. And, it's a tragedy, but it's okay to say I'm frustrated or I'm
Yeah,
mad. And,
yeah.
and, it's hard for mom too. And that's just everybody has hard things in life and that's okay.
Well, that's why, that book I mentioned, How to Talk So Kids Will Listen, Listen So Kids Will Talk. That active listening, that reflective listening. Sibs often, what I've learned, whether it's in SibNet or Sibshops, SibTeen, I've learned that Sibs want to be heard. You
Yeah.
can't always fix the situation, right? But if you can be heard, it means a lot.
Yeah.
Just knowing that somebody's listening to you and validating your concerns
Hmm.
means the world to Sibs.
Yeah. That rings true for me and a lot of people that I've talked with. Well, I think there's probably a lot more. And I know that, with all of the books you've written and Sib shops that you've led, there's a lot more tips that you probably have to share, but we'll make people read the books and come to the
There you
Sib
go.
shop trainings. So just quickly before I let you go, if we could just circle back, what has changed in the landscape in the past, couple of decades since you started this work? And what do you think the biggest needs still are?
Well, I think Sibs are getting on more people's radar screens, and I'm happy to hear that. We're starting to see national organizations like the ARC and United Cerebral Palsy and Easter Seals, acknowledge Sibs, and some of them have made their own sibling initiatives, and there's a lot of good work to be done on every level. And when I think of what needs for the future Sib, it's more. We need more of all of the above. We need more organizations. We need more outreach. We need more to do with young Sibs, even preschool Sibs. There's lots of more good work to be done with adapting the Sib shop model further for teen Sibs. There are teen Sib shops, but more work needs to be done on that. Adult Sibs are a very deserving group. Emily, the new director of the Sibling Support Project, and I wrote a book called The Sibling Survival Guide. And we have as our target reader when we thought of who we were writing for, it was a sister who is in her 40s, who has a brother who has autism and a family of her own, and parents who have not done an especially good job of preparing for her brother's future. And there are a lot of those people out there, as I know you've seen on SibNet.
Yeah.
And we try to give them a bit of a toolbox of what they can do to prepare for the days to come. And that is, I think, a very good first step, but I think there's more work to be done for Sibs of all ages.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely would agree. And, really, that being said, though, there are so many wonderful programs that are out there, a lot of which are created by you. So I just want to thank you personally for everything that you've done to pave the way.
Thank you, Jessica.
Yeah, for myself and other Sibs, and hopefully people listening, other people in hospitals and schools and research departments, will go forth and carry the torch that you have lit for all of us and them, and get more of the stuff going on the ground.
It's been my distinct pleasure to be of service to brothers and sisters. There's just such an amazingly deserving community, and it's been a real honor to be able to have done what I've done. So even though I'm retired, I'm, the Sib stuff still in my, it's in my DNA, right? So it's not something I'm likely to give up anytime soon. So
yeah,
I continue to volunteer with the Sibling Support Project and support Emily, who's doing just a wonderful job with Sibshops and all our other initiatives.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time. We will definitely post in the show notes a lot of links. I think this one will be chock full of resources. I'll give the link to the Sibling Support Project so people can find Sibshops in their area and access all of those things you were talking about. And maybe a couple of the books that you've recommended too, because I think that is, hopefully we can get people started with a nice comprehensive resource list for anyone interested in this issue. This is a great kind of kickstart for their learning.
Well, thank you for calling attention to all those brothers and sisters out there.
All right. So again, for everybody listening, that was Don Meyer, founder of the Sibling Support Project and the Sibshop program for young Sibs. We will have lots of resources for you in the show notes, so be sure and check them out. If you liked what you heard today and want to support our work, please don't forget to hit that subscribe button and leave us a review. You can also check out our website, supportingspecialsiblings.com, to learn more about the book, the podcast, and more ways you can get involved. We couldn't do this without you. Take care.